Today is July 13th, 2022, and we're here at the Warren County Record Center and Archives. We're part of our Warren County Employee Histories. My name is Tori Otten, and I am the archival specialist here.
My name is Jennifer Baker, and I am the Deputy Archivist.
Today we're going to have our guests introduce themselves, if you'd be so kind.
My name is Keith Anderson. I worked at the County Prosecutor's Office for 31 years and just retired, so I'm here to help out on this.
And we are so thankful for you. It
Okay.
really helps our cause. So, you've already said your name, so when and where were you born?
I was born in Vincennes, Indiana.
Oh.
It's in Knox County. It's right on the Wabash River.
Oh.
Or take US 50 and go west and you'll hit it from Cincinnati, yeah.
So, did you grow up there or somewhere else?
No, I grew up in Knox County, not in the city, but on a farm in the county.
Okay. So, where have you lived since then now?
Okay, after going to college, I lived at Purdue University for however many years. I was there, 4, I guess. I then lived in Cincinnati when I went to law school, and then I lived in Lebanon since then. Not many places, not many cities, yeah.
So, you went to Purdue for your undergrad. Did you go to UC for your law degree?
I did.
Okay. And did you have any other jobs prior to working for Warren County?
Yes, I was, for 3 years prior to 1990, I was with a small law firm in Cincinnati. And for 3 years prior to that, I was with a small law firm in northern Kentucky.
So, since you've answered a lot of our general background questions, we can move on to department questions about your actual history here.
Okay.
So, you've already said that you worked for the prosecutor's office for 30 years. What positions did you hold in that department while you were here?
Assistant prosecutor.
The whole time?
Yeah.
I love it.
Various assignments, but
Okay.
the same title.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So the prosecutor's office is what brought you to Lebanon?
Yes.
Interesting. So, what year did you start?
September of 1990.
1990. Okay. Can you tell us about the different locations your office was located while you were working here?
Yes, initially it was on Warren Street. I couldn't tell you the address, but it's where Task is now. It's in the same building as the old, where the old courthouse is, only it's on Warren Street. It's kind of a little old house.
Yes.
And after that, after that we moved into the building at 500, or at, it was 500 Justice Drive. What's there now is, I think there's a couple of small courtrooms and court personnel of some kind, magistrates, I think.
Okay. So, what was an average day of work like for you compared to the beginning of your career here versus when you were leaving?
Okay. Before I forget though, after we left that, they built that new building.
Okay.
It's now 520 Justice Drive. And so we moved from that downstairs up to that second floor on that new building. But in between time, I also spent some time on the third floor in this building, in the admin building, because before they built that new building, we were bursting at the seams. We didn't have room. So the division that I worked for in the civil division of the prosecutor's office moved upstairs where, I'm not sure who's there now. It's on the third floor here.
Right.
In this building.
So what was that like going from like a small house situation and then kind of like in some courtrooms, and then now you guys have an entire floor to yourselves?
Well, it's much nicer. It's the envy of a lot of prosecutors who come to visit us, or other law enforcement from other counties. They are envious of our building. It's a lot different. Of course, everything has changed since.
Well, right.
We didn't have computers when I started, or cell phones. So, along with that change in all of that came the change in not only personnel, but technology and workspace.
Well, and is it the growth that has happened throughout the county that has increased the prosecutor's office, personnel and size?
It goes hand in hand. When I started, we had 4 attorneys doing criminal felony prosecutions, and 3 of them were part-time. So as the county grew, then yes, population, unfortunately, that type of work comes with it. And in the civil division that I eventually worked for, we'll probably get to this, is a lot based on growth too, the growth of the county.
So did you enjoy working on Warren Street in the smaller
Yeah.
confines?
Yeah, there was few people. It was very cozy.
Right.
You know, the conference room had a big fireplace like a lot of these old houses do around here, and yeah, it was a lot different. Shared space, but that's
Well,
okay.
and the county must have looked a lot different when you first moved here, especially from Cincinnati to Warren County.
Yeah, I was used as an example, the Mason Montgomery Road. If you're heading up 71 North and you get off at Fields Earl Road, take Mason Montgomery Road. When I started, there was a Waffle House, a Shell station, a polo field, and I think that nursery may have been there.
Yes, Natorps.
Natorps, and I think that's all until P&G built their research center there, and then it just went boom.
Well, and did you like the small town aspect of Warren County and the more rural?
Yes, I
Is
did.
that
We
what-
lived in Clifton and Cincinnati for a number of years, and I was raised on a farm. My wife was raised on a farm, so yeah, we liked that we could get on our bikes and 3 or 4 blocks and we were in the country. But can't do that from where we lived anymore.
Not as much. So, I guess we will talk about what was your average day like at the beginning of your career when you said it was
Yes.
less individuals were working full time, less busy as far as crime rate, I suppose you would say.
Yeah, and normally most of my time at that time was spent in criminal prosecution. So, and we had the courthouses. The courts were here on 500 Justice Drive. So we had a little driving back and forth at the whim of the dockets. We were controlled by the scheduling of the court. So, but my average day then would be, in the mornings I'd do criminal prosecutions. Either you didn't have that many trials, actual jury trials, but we had a few every year. I did, and also when I started, I also worked in the civil division because at the time I started, we only had one lawyer, who's now Judge Mike Powell at the 12th District, doing civil work, and he was part-time. But it was just getting out of hand work-wise. And since I had some experience in the civil arena, and by civil I mean non-criminal, all things legal that is not criminal prosecution, I started doing both right off the bat because, I did 25% of the criminal cases and whatever we needed in the civil division. And largely things like the boom on Mason Montgomery Road. There was a lot of land that had to be acquired to widen that road and a lot of stuff like that.
So when you're working on those civil cases, do you work with the other departments in the county a lot to try to, do the research on?
Yes. What a lot of people don't know, and one of your questions here about what the prosecutor does, is that the county prosecutor is the legal, is the attorney for all of the county elected officials, departments, like public libraries, some schools, Board of DD, Board of Elections, all these things that we are required by law, we being the prosecutor's office, requires you to have, that's what we call the civil division, the non-criminal. We represent townships, we represent all elected officials, from coroner to sheriff to commissioners to judges, and to my once boss, the prosecutor. I actually represented him on stuff, so that's what the prosecutor, that's one thing that people don't really know what the prosecutor's office does, and that's a lot of it in that area.
So as the assistant prosecutor, so let's say for instance with the growth in Warren County, would you actually go to the other departments to do research on those cases and work directly with them, or how did that work?
Yeah, we say if there's development going on, I don't really have expertise in that, but subdivision law, water and sewers going into these new places, there's zoning to be done. And yes, we would work closely with places like the engineer's office, the zoning department here, the water and sewer department, everybody who's and townships if they're involved, and if there's no conflict, we would be their counsel for anything they needed. If that meant easements, acquisitions, zoning issues.
Right, I was just thinking like our map department, they reach out to us a lot to look for historic
Sure.
court records.
Right.
So I wasn't sure if you guys represented, like if you got into that with.
Yeah, if it was overlapping us, the map department's part of the engineer's office, which is also one of our clients because he's an elected official. So yeah, we would work with them on whatever a lot of the county agencies do their own work up to the point they need a lawyer. And then they call us for whatever reason, deeds, easements, that type of thing.
It's so interesting now. I'd never thought much about that, so.
Most people haven't.
Right.
Most people don't know
Yeah.
that there is a civil division, and I try to explain it as being like if you think of the county as a corporation, they have a corporate lawyer that does everything from personnel matters to whatever they have, a lot of contract work, and that's what the civil division does for Warren County, for the county.
So which department would be larger then, your criminal division or the civil division? 'Cause-
Criminal,
Okay.
Okay.
yes. They have, I don't know how many, but they encompass also the juvenile court prosecutors, county court prosecutors, and felony prosecutors in the common pleas court.
So that's kind of what you started out doing. And then how has your position transitioned and what does that day today look like now?
At one point when there was a change, gradually the civil division became busier, and as did the criminal. But as we expanded, at some point when the prosecutor changed from Oliver, Judge Oliver's, who once prosecutor, then Judge Oliver, I worked for. The next prosecutor in line was Rachel Hutzel, and she was in the civil division, and she asked that I switch from all criminal to doing all civil. I don't know, somewhere around the early 2000s. And so I didn't get out of criminal division that easily. We had one military guy that was getting called up, you know how that happens, so I kind of transitioned from getting rid of all my criminal cases because I covered his stuff, and eventually then just settled into the civil division.
So when you transition from criminal to civil, who takes over the prior obligations?
Well, they had new lawyers coming in.
Lawyers, okay.
Yeah, they hired lawyers as we gradually increased lawyers. That would have been part of it.
Okay.
Are there big differences that occur when a new prosecutor is brought in?
So far, no.
Okay, I was gonna
Not
say,
in-
could that be a thing?
Right.
It could be a thing.
Okay.
In Warren County, it isn't, because it could have been.
Mhm.
Yes, could have been, but no, there was no mass exodus or mass replacements in any of the prosecutors I've been through.
Which I suppose leads me to another question. So when there is a new prosecutor that comes in, like how much control do they have to change things? I guess that's not
Complete.
control. Okay.
Yeah. Aside of the fact of classified and civil servants, they can't get rid of. You can't just fire classified civil servants without cause or without jumping through some hoops. But somebody like me, I was in the terminable at will. The lawyers are not classified. The lawyers are terminable at will, and if it is not uncommon for a new attorney to bring in people, especially in the higher levels of administrative stuff, because they trust them, they know them, and well, that would not be unusual. Didn't happen here, luckily.
Do you tend to find a lot of the attorneys who come to work for the Warren County Prosecutors Department tend to have law degrees from very nearby schools?
Yes, we have a lot of UD, University of Dayton. We have a lot of UC. Might have Northern Kentucky. I'd have to think about that. But there's probably a few. I can't think of any other law schools right off. I'm sure there is, and I'm sorry for them. I'm forgetting what they are.
I believe that the two that you mentioned mainly are they're the largest in this area, correct?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and people go into the prosecutor's office tend to stay local. You know, so they went to local schools. They want to stay local. They can get a job at the prosecutor sometimes.
Yeah. So, how often did you have to interact with the public if it weren't for a case? Did you ever have to interact if you weren't, say, doing research or such things?
Yeah, almost daily, probably. The public, when I started in the criminal prosecution field, we would all take turns each day meeting the public who wanted to come in and talk about filing charges where there was no police involved. So at least weekly, I had one of those days that I would do that, the walk-ins, where we call them filing charges. Sometimes we would, sometimes we wouldn't. So I had contact with them, and then of course we had contact with any witnesses we used in the criminal case. So yes, pretty regularly.
Did you have a large quantity of those walk-ins on a regular basis?
Yes. I don't know number-wise. You were lucky if you made it through a day without doing it, because you could do all your office work that you needed to do. But yes, because people would come in and want to do something about their kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we always felt like we were disciplinarians for a lot of the children. They wanted to file, and you had legitimate runaway cases, you had domestic cases, that type of thing. But if it was a serious or more serious offense, you probably had police involved. But police would come in on that day too.
I was just
It
about to
wasn't-
ask, like, what does that actual process look like when people want to press charges? Because, I mean, clearly they come in with,
Well, they might come in without a police report. They've never
Right.
called the police. They just want to do something. You know, my kid ran away yesterday. They want to do a runaway thing, something like that, which is a valid concern, of course. But we also met with police officers that came in, that would want to come in and file charges. They'd arrested somebody. You got to file something within 24 hours, so they would come in the next day and do it.
So you clearly were very, very busy every day. What did your schedule look like? Were you working a standard 40 hours or far more than that?
If I did not have a trial to prepare for, you could normally get by with 40 hours. Actually, when I started here, it was 35 hours, which was odd. Everybody, I think, in the county was on a 35-hour week. That eventually bumped up to 40. Yeah, we didn't goof off much. I mean, obviously, it comes and goes. It would get busy, then it wouldn't. But normally, if I did not have to do trial preparation or meet witnesses, you know, other people work too, so you have to meet them at nights or weekends. And doing the civil stuff, township meetings sometimes don't start till 7 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock at night, and if we represent a township, we will go to those meetings as needed, not all the time, but just kind of on demand.
If you had a case that went to trial, how long is the process from start to finish of a standard trial, I suppose you could say?
If you start from arrest, there are statutory and constitutional time limits within which you have to bring a case to trial. Those can be waived or extended depending upon what the defendant chooses. The defendant can waive that time, prosecutor cannot. So within a certain amount of time, it depends on the charge. But let's say after they're indicted, if they're in jail, it gets done pretty quickly because we have to. If they're not in jail, those time limits are extended. You know, a major case, major thing, it could be a year to do a murder trial just because the defense may hire experts, we hire experts, all kinds of things get involved in those. Now, I don't want to say run-of-the-mill crime, because if you ask a victim, there is no run-of-the-mill crime. But you know, a theft offense of some kind is going to be done in a few months unless something strange happens.
Very interesting. So, do you have any memorable cases that you worked on that very much stick out to you during your tenure?
Well, yeah, on the criminal side, I prosecuted the first murder case that I did where the defendant faced the death penalty. Was a murder. That's probably not my most memorable, but that's the one that those stick out in your mind. And the second one was two guys murdered a convenience store clerk working the night shift, of course. And that one, we did have two defendants, both facing the death penalty, and we had to go. Well, one of them entered a plea, one of them went to trial. Those were memorable because you remember the victims.
Right. So, is there anybody who would be memorable not tied to your cases, like your coworkers or any peers that you had in the department, managers, anybody who really made an impact on you?
Yeah, I would say so. I work closely with Bruce McGarry. He's an assistant prosecutor. He does a lot of our real estate stuff, so I learned a lot about real estate and being meticulous from him, and also about just life. He's just a good guy. And then there's everybody, you can't go without mentioning Chris Watkins, I went to law school with, and he's one of the nicest, authentic people you'll meet. But he didn't influence me so much through legal work, but just personality, personal things.
So what was your favorite law to practice, I suppose? Like, what, did you prefer criminal, or did you enjoy civil or specific case types?
Switching to civil at the time I did was good timing, because the criminal I had done not only here but in my previous life, and I preferred switching into the civil, so it was good timing when we had a change of prosecutor and they needed someone to do that. It was just good timing that I got to do it.
So when did you say that switch was from criminal to civil?
It was when Judge Oliver, Tim Oliver, prosecutor, became judge, and Rachel Hutzel became prosecutor. And somewhere around 02 or 04, I think there was an election in 04 probably, but she may have been appointed to fill a vacancy and then was elected after that.
Is that election cycle stressful for anyone?
Can
in the
be.
Prosecutor's office, I would say, was there
Can
like
be.
a different feeling going into those years? You know.
The first couple of elections that I lived through, no, but then eventually there was a little more stress in another one. But
I'm just thinking of like takeovers from corporate. Like, is that what it feels like? Like you just don't know exactly how it'll play out, sort of a situation. Yes. Yeah.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So something you and I had talked about earlier is that in 2009 you were president of the Warren County Bar Association. What was that experience like?
Well, it's Bar Association is not affiliated with the prosecutor's office. It's just a private, all lawyers don't have to, but they can belong to it. More of a social club. The IRS calls it something like a club. The reason I mention that is because that year our membership rose enough that the dues that are collected exceeded that amount that the IRS, the point where they require you to file, I think it's like a 990, some sort of a form like that. And of course, nobody had done it. So, not because they just didn't know. I mean, they didn't.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, when I became treasurer before that, that all hit. And so we had to get reorganized, we had to get all of our taxes in shape. And, but as president, that was when I was treasurer, and it kind of carried through the years. But as president, things were getting bigger, and there was more membership, and it's kind of fun. It's not hard work being president, really. You go to meetings, you get a free lunch, because our bar association was very congenial and small at the time. And we do a CLE, a continuing legal education, which we have requirements to do. So we'll do one of those at 11 o'clock, have a lunch catered into the grand jury room over there at 12 o'clock. And that was where we had our bar association meetings, was after we all finished lunch. And then we would just do whatever bar association stuff we did.
Interesting.
I imagine it was nice to have your peers to discuss,
Yeah.
like the daily life of.
Yeah, things came up, like most recently, I guess the thing that worked, it was a good thing, is the Bar Association backed the defense bar wanting to increase the fees paid to the public defenders, because to keep them in line with other counties and to keep lawyers interested in doing that. And they were all underpaid. Even the prosecutor made the motion to do that, just to do a support for that, because it is important that they get compensated fairly for doing it. I did it in Cincinnati, so I like that.
This is kind of a selfish question for us, but I know we've had to reach out to you as the Record Center and Archives. Like, what sort of interactions have you had with our department through the years?
Well, I've been your lawyer for the most part. Mostly me have been, since I've been doing the civil work, did legal work for your director and the previous director, and of course we represent the recorder also, who runs the Records Commission. So yeah, we've a lot of contract stuff, you know, the shredders and the storage up in Dayton, whatever, I forget what it is. Some personnel issues in the past, not lately, luckily. But we've had that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I used to go to the Records Commission meetings on a regular basis. Our prosecutor now does that himself unless he's gone, and he'll assign, I keep saying me, but one of the other assistant prosecutors. I just retired last Thursday, so.
So, did you have to get involved in, say, the records retention as well, since that's a state dictated schedule?
Yeah, over the years, you know, the first one that I saw of the prosecutor's office had like 3 things on it, or maybe 6. And as records retention became more, I wouldn't say popular, but more active, and with things like lawsuits, etc., I'd say every retention schedule of every division of the county has been rewritten numerous times since I've been here, out of necessity, because they should have been all along. So, yeah, I'm spent a lot of time on records retention schedules.
Do you have any cases that come to mind where there was a public record needed for it and it was not available?
Not anything specific. We've had public records requests, obviously weekly, if not daily. Not just our office, but everybody's office. You know, there was a time when the Board of Elections destroyed some ballots early. They have schedules when they can destroy them. It didn't hurt anything, but it was one of those things that just happened because they were in the wrong pile or something. That I can't remember being sued because they didn't exist. There is a current lawsuit that was filed right before I left. It has to do with commissioners' meetings. I don't know the status of it. I don't know where it's going.
Here's the thing about the Record Center, we retain multiple records for other departments, but it's always intriguing
Yes.
for the different state requirements for how long certain things, as for example, your department does not have a great quantity of files in the back compared to others, but there's certain things that are quite, they will be there forever. They will be here longer than any of us.
Right.
So it's how, with the retention of the prosecutors, what would dictate something that would have to stay forever?
By policy and not by law, the prosecutor's office has decided to keep things like murders and other violent type offenses, sex offenses or murders, basically forever, or at least until whoever dies, the bad guy dies, if that can be the case. Otherwise, they have a policy, each type of case. Normally, the criminal cases are kept for 10 years after they're over, which counts the appeals and everything, plus 10 years. But their policy is to keep the murder cases longer because those things crop up again through federal courts and everything, and I don't think they destroy any of them. Maybe sometime, but maybe not. You might have them a while. I know I know it says on the retention schedule though they are not to be destroyed.
Yes, there's an entire wall down here of those cases that you're talking about.
Right.
This is purely a curiosity on my part question.
Okay.
What do you do with evidence that is no longer needed? Do you retain it or keep it, I suppose?
Yeah, ideally we give it back to the police department who seized it because the prosecutor's office does not go out and seize evidence, as does the police departments with a search warrant or at the scene of a crime. Ideally, we return it to them. And they have what they call property rooms normally, where they keep stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That one was purely just me.
No, that's all right.
So from there, I believe that's most of our department-based questions. So
Okay.
these are just some questions about Warren County as a whole. So what would you consider some of your highlights of your time with Warren County?
I was trying to think of this when I read these in advance, of course. It has more to do with, not with the work, but with outside of work. Friends I made, things we did, golfing and stuff like that. So my most memorable time with the county was not necessarily my employment with the county, although it came from that.
Interesting. So you've already kind of broached upon this one, but when you started the county, clearly much smaller in 1990, when
Yes.
you were a very small building on Warren Street. What was the entirety of the county like, and the operation of the county compared to 1990 to when you just left?
Much more laid back. Look at the records retention and the public records requests. We didn't get public records requests in 1990. And as that example, it became more popular when there was sometime in the 90s, one of the large media groups did a statewide sting operation, not really, but they just went just to research who was actually doing it right and who wasn't. And they'd go to a lot of the little counties out in the boondocks, I call them, which we were at the time, and just see if we were doing it right. And then they printed up a big report about that, and a lot of them weren't. But that kind of started the process of people making public records requests. It became knowledgeable that they could do so. And most are valid, and most are easy to deal with. The press has learned how to do it, we've learned how to do it, and you can usually just talk to people and figure out what they're really looking for. Some people will ask for anything and everything under the sun, which we don't have to give, but sometimes if you just talk to them, you find out what they're really looking for. So the question was, what has changed? That type of case stuff has expanded, and obviously the development stuff too. Crimes happen about the same.
Fair enough. So,
Yeah.
What types of significant events happened during your time as an employee? Overall in the county, not necessarily just the prosecutor's office.
Okay. Significant events, the country as a whole. We had significant events in 30 years. A lot of things have happened, wars, etc. I don't know what has happened here that has had that big of an impact overall. There's been tragedies and there's been triumphs, I guess. The tragedies are what everybody remembers, police officers killed or hurt or whatever. But I don't know what significant events that I don't know how I would respond to that.
This kind of piggybacks off of a significant event. Is there a case that happened that was very sensationalized that you were a part of, like in the media, that it kind of like crept outside of your primary job duties, where it was like?
Well, yeah, there's been murder cases that I was only in, since I haven't been doing criminal cases for a number of years myself, but we always had to deal with public records issues. Again, I'm bringing back that as a reference. Things like the Ryan Widmer case, if anybody remembers, it was tried 3 times. The press was all over it. Private groups were all over it. Authors were all over it in the press. So I spent a lot of time sorting through public records, sorting through the file, not just me, but others, to determine what was public record and what wasn't at the time, because there was 3 trials. So you have to figure out when you start.
Right.
When do you stop and when does it? It's all basically public record now, but it
Like,
wasn't.
Did that creep into your personal life outside of work
No,
at all?
no. Other than everybody you meet ask you about it.
Yeah.
Hey, are you like? No.
So I guess in regards to our what type of significant events question, one that we did not even think about recently, but a few other retirees have told us, is 9/11 made a big impact upon them working for the county at the time. What was your experience with that? Did you notice differences in different ways the county operated?
Security tightened up on just about every place, although that was happening anyway. I think the law enforcement folks who I interacted with were probably affected largely by it more. I think they tightened up on things. But as far as affecting what I did at the county, probably not. Not a big deal. I mean, it was a big deal, obviously, but not as it related to my work.
This question pertains to, earlier I asked if you noticed changes in the system once you got your prosecutor. Did it affect you all when a new judge or a new sheriff was elected?
Yes. Yes, it does. the sheriffs that I've had have been, well, only one came from outside the system, and that was Tom Harris, because he was a state trooper. He was retired. But Larry Sims was a detective, an officer and a detective before, so I knew him from my criminal prosecution days anyway. Yes, that can make a difference, and also the judges make a probably bigger difference, at least my experience, because they handle things differently. You have to figure out when you're the prosecutor, you have to figure out when to be nice and when to fight. You know, sometimes you have to argue, and sometimes they're right. Darn it! But,
Well, so this might be a weird question, but because as a prosecutor, you clearly have to present information in front of other people. Like, I have severe stage fright. Like, was that when you first started ever like an issue for you?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came from the criminal defense side in Cincinnati. I worked at I took public defender cases there. So the trials I did there was the defense side, and you don't have to prove anything. When you become prosecutor, you have to prove everything. And so, and you go first, you know, so when the jury walks in the room, or even without the jury, but the jury case, I wasn't too nervous about bench trials. Yeah, I was nervous, or at least somewhat anxious up until the end of the jury trials, because you have to speak and you have to convince people about something. Yeah, unless you're comfortable public speaking, it's not easy, and it wasn't easy for me the whole time.
Well, and that's like a different level where you have to be on it, listening and, you know, keeping up with what is going on and what's being discussed so that you're present. So that's an interesting.
You can't let your mind wander
Right.
at any time. The worst experience is when a judge looks at you and says, "What do you think about that?" And you say, "What?" You know,
I was thinking
sorry,
my grocery
I zoned
list.
out there a little bit. What?
Yeah.
What was the question again?
Yeah.
I mean, that has happened.
Right. I was about to say, I feel like you would just have to be present, like learn how.
Yeah, you have to be on your toes.
Yeah.
Do you
At all
have
times.
to use any de-stressing techniques when you went home? I feel like that is a very high stress environment compared to, say, what we are used to here.
Yeah, I like to do things other than just sit. You know, in the summer it's easy. It's harder in the winter because there's nothing much to do outside. But
That's fair.
nothing in particular, really.
So what are some of the most important things that you learned from working for Warren County?
Well, let's see. The most important things I've learned. I suppose it's maybe tolerance, and that is of other people's views and opinions and all that, and viewpoints. You know, criminal victim sees things different than say a family member might, or a family member of the defendant might, and they all have valid reasons to think what they think. So tolerance of others and patience, I think. You gotta be patient with people. Like, it can be very stressful for the players in the cases. You know, I'm gonna go home after it's over and start a new one the next day, whereas the victims or the defendants or their families, they're not gonna, that's the only time they've ever done it, hopefully for them. They've never had to do it more than once, and that sticks. So, you know, patience, tolerance, understanding, I learned that from just doing it, I guess.
Is there ever a situation where you all in the prosecutor's office have additional support when it comes to working with people like that? Like, as far as like mental health, or, you know what I mean? Like, is there, because it is such a delicate subject with some of the cases, like, do they ever bring in maybe outside people to help support the staff when it comes to stuff like that?
Not support the staff, but for victims. They have within the prosecutor's office a victim witness division, or victim advocates, and to each criminal case is assigned a victim advocate to do communications with the victims, and more than that. You know, notify them, keep them advised of what's going on, go to court with them, meet with their family, and all that. Help them through the system. But for the lawyers, we don't have we don't have that. So far, I guess we haven't needed it. I mean, maybe some people do.
Interesting. So what, I realize you've only been gone a little while, but
Okay.
what will you miss the most about working for Warren County?
Well, it's probably the same answer everybody gives. I thought about that one too. I'll miss everybody I worked with.
The people.
That's probably what everybody says, isn't it?
Right.
To start
Yeah,
with, I mean,
usually it's very similar.
to a certain extent, I will
Yes.
miss just working,
Mhm.
doing the type of thing that I was doing. But I can still do some work outside, but no, I think it's more along the line of individual people plus going to a place where there are people every day. You know, a lot of people there, and
Warren
people-
County does a great job at building community within.
yeah, I think so. So I know that sounds like everybody else, but that's probably the truth.
Well,
I
fair
think
well
it
for
is.
Warren County, we all very much appreciate our peers.
Yeah, I think so. I can't think of anybody who I would avoid walking down the street. You know, over the years, anybody that I worked with or know that I work with, I see them come down the street, I'm probably not gonna cross over to avoid them. I mean, I'd probably chat with them if I saw them.
So, do you have any advice for any current employees?
I would say don't give up on your employer. At times you get stressed or you think there might be greener grass somewhere else, and there might be, but you need to pay attention to what you've got first before you go jumping off a cliff, because it may not be better. So advice would be patient and think about what you got before you give it up.
I like that. So, that is our last official question. Do you have anything else you would like to share with us?
You know, I thought of that question too. I don't know, we've kind of covered everything as far as the county goes, so no, I don't think I have anything to add.
Well, in that case, we would like to thank you for participating in our program.
Yeah.
And I will conclude this oral history.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.